NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel just got an interview with someone close to Iran's supreme leader who might have an answer to that. Also with us, MSNBC foreign affairs analyst and the former special assistant to President Obama, Ambassador Dennis Ross. Richard, I know you just spoke with the political and military advisor to the supreme leader. Does he think a deal could happen here?
He wants a deal, and I think that was the significance. So I sat down earlier today with Ali Shamkhani, and he is one of the most powerful men in this country, one of the few people authorized to talk about these negotiations. His initial reaction to President Trump's speech yesterday in Saudi Arabia, in which he spent most of his time talking about Iran in very negative terms, talking about how it has been a source of chaos in the region, a sponsor of terrorism, a sponsor of destruction. He took somewhat of offense to that. But then, in the end, he said that he still wants a deal. He still thinks a deal is possible. And again, to set up the context of this bite, we'll play it in a second. Not only is he one of the few people authorized to speak about the deal, as you mentioned, he is an advisor, a top advisor to the supreme leader. He's from the Revolutionary Guard. He's an admiral. He's a hardliner. He is also a nuclear advisor to the supreme leader. So we're talking about the very top echelons of power, and the fact that he agreed to speak to an American, to a journalist, right after President Trump made his comments, I think speaks volumes. So here's a little piece of that interview. He's open to a deal. Is that still possible? Or after what you heard, do you think that's impossible?
A deal is still possible. If they do what they say, we can definitely have better relations with the U.S.
He also laid out in what might be the clearest statements yet from someone at his level, someone from the supreme leader's office, what exactly Iran expects and what Iran is willing to do. He said that Iran would be willing to get rid of its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, get it out of the country, give it to a third party, not have it anymore, to only enrich to a low level for civilian use, to allow international observers here to supervise the entire process, to commit to never having a nuclear weapon in exchange for the immediate lifting of sanctions. He said if that's met, Iran will sign a deal today.
Richard Engel, thank you so much. So, Ambassador, you heard him. He said a deal is possible, but how do you assess the likelihood of a deal?
I think there's actually a greater likelihood of a deal than one might imagine. One, because the Iranians actually need it, and two, it's very clear that President Trump wants it. So if you have one party that needs it and the other one that wants it, even though there's obviously a very difficult history here, I think the prospect of a deal is there. But I should note, when I say it, I mean like a framework agreement. I think it'll take a long time to produce a much more comprehensive agreement. But a framework agreement that might produce a freeze, down blending of the existing high stockpiles of 60% in return for some limiting, some relaxation of sanctions, I think that's very much in the cards. Whether we see it remains to be seen, but I think it's very much in the cards.
Well, that's further than we have been many times before. Let me ask you about the other big news that's coming out of this trip. The Abraham Accords, as you know, were signed 5 years ago. What impact would Syria signing on have? And do you see that happening?
I don't see it happening soon. I think what you see is what could be a step-by-step approach. What I think was important that came out of this meeting, just the fact of the meeting is important. This is a government that is still trying to establish itself. This is a government that still has within it elements that are extremist Sunni Islamist elements. I think the ability of Ahmed al-Shara to deliver on a peace agreement with Israel at this point is probably a bridge too far. But he talked about reestablishing the disengagement agreement with the Israelis. I think you could see a series of moves in the direction, but I think actually you probably have to see Saudi normalization before you will see Syrian normalization.
Yeah, we talked earlier in the show about the fact that these negotiations, these talks are getting underway in Doha just a day after the bombing of a hospital. Look, Benjamin Netanyahu has survived a lot. His political position, especially early on in the war, was questioned whether he could continue. It has survived deaths of hostages, global opposition to some of the actions in Gaza, near daily protests in his own country, a lot of criticism from the hostage families. NBC News has even been reporting about the rift between President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu. What do you see as his status continuing to lead Israel?
He has a government that understands very clearly if there were elections soon, if the government were to fall and there were elections soon, those who are in the current government wouldn't be in the next one. So their sense of self-preservation creates a very strong incentive to preserve the existing coalition. There is a split now with the religious parties in the coalition who are insisting that there needs to be new legislation that continues to exempt the ultra-religious. That is something that 80% of the country is against, because the burden of the reservists, the people who've served 300 days in the reserves, while there's a population that's exempt from observing, and they could make up for the shortfall in personnel that the Israeli military is experiencing, that is a real issue. The question is, will those parties follow through on the threats they're making now? That if there isn't, in fact, legislation that satisfies them, they will withdraw from the government. I think that's a threat that might be real, but I'm just not sure they're prepared to act on it. So I think you will see, I still think you'll see an election next year. I think the real issue is going to be coming up much more quickly. You have the Trump administration clearly wanting to negotiate another ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu will go along with another ceasefire, but he doesn't want to commit to ending the war because that will bring down the government from the extreme right-wingers like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Now, if there's real pressure from the Trump administration to do a ceasefire deal that lasts for 45 days, but at the end of it, they want to see the end of the war, that will be the greatest single challenge that Prime Minister Netanyahu will face to the survivability of this government. So that we should watch closely. A, is there going to be another hostage deal for 45 days, which the administration is trying very hard to produce while the president is still in the region? B, if it is, will they insist at the end of 45 days to try to bring that war to an end? To do that, they will also need to come up with what will be an alternative to Hamas, because you can't just end this war getting the hostages out. You also have to have an alternative to Hamas. This Israeli government hasn't been prepared to work on that. Ultimately, if you don't want Hamas in control, you have to have an alternative to it in Gaza.